shooting the shunting scene?
It was a whole lot of fun. It was certainly a highlight of
Yeah.
my life.
What was it like to get all those actors to go absolutely to that like nth degree? Like, did they just kind of lean into it? Were they shy? Did they know what they're getting into?
Well, I think one of the things that I learned working with actors and extras is that God, they'll do almost anything. The shunt was, we didn't have a lot of money, so a lot of the people in the shunt are friends and crew. So I can look, when I see the shunt, I see a lot of people I know. and also horror fans, journalists, and whoever was around got pulled into it. And then there were a number of extras, regular, extras casting type people. And they have to come, we cast them according to whether they had like formal dress. But when they start going, you just go, God, how these ordinary people actually will just do anything.
Was there anyone who surprised you the most?
Pardon?
Was there anyone who surprised you the most and how much they kind of leaned into that scene?
That surprised me the most?
Yeah.
I really loved the old lady with the spaghetti. No, I just think it's I think people really like to do that, and I think when you get, people want to act, and that's like real acting. It's none of this sort of soap opera like, angsty. It's like, that's the movie.
And the men, and why did the theme of paranoia really appeal to you?
I was working with Dan O'Bannon, which for those who don't recognize his name, was the writer of Alien. I was working with him on a project called The Men, back in like 1987 or something. And it was about a woman that discovers that all men are aliens. And at that time, that was kind of a very cool concept. I think today it doesn't work as well. But we worked for a long time on it. And he was going to direct it. And then right when I got the financing, he was an oddball. He was an odd character. A lot of people who are real creative, or the kind that I like, sometimes are strange. And he kind of bailed right when I got the money. And I was really disappointed because I spent a lot of time with him working up this project. And then a few months later, I got the opportunity, maybe even a couple months later, I got the opportunity to make a couple movies. And at that time, I had produced Reanimator, Dolls, and From Beyond, and I think Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And at that time, I was thinking, I'd like to direct something. And so then I thought, well, I have the rights to Reanimator, and a friend of mine, Keith Wally, who's one of the producers on Society with Paul White, was starting up his own production company. And Paul White was a Brit that lived in Japan, and at that time Japanese were very big. They were very successful and they had money, and so they had financed these movies. And so he had this company. I said, wow, I love what you're doing. I want to do something with you. And because I just, I got your own company making these movies. And then I said, I've got the right, I can do a sequel to Reanimator and I want to direct it, but I don't want to do it. But I know that, I can tell you this, but in my mind, I knew that usually, it's tough. Your first movie can be terrible. you know, like the French say, most people make 2 movies in one, their first and their last. And since I've never been trained in any way in the movie business, I thought, well, I might be terrible, so I want to have a second chance. So I thought, well, the Reanimator sequel's number 2, and the first one has to be something else. So if it failed, I'd have a chance to do that. And that's how Society came about. So Society was a script that was given to me by Rick Fry and Woody Keith. And it was their original script. And actually, it sounds odd, but I think it was sort of a alternate universe autobiography by Woody Keith, who was a Beverly Hills kid who really, really did believe that his family was up to weird stuff. And it had this sense of paranoia to it. And it was the same paranoia that I recognized from the men. This idea that there was this whole other world, something that you just didn't realize about the regular world. And so that's what attracted me to doing Society, because then I saw it and I thought, wow, I've been dealing with this kind of idea, except in another kind of narrative, for a year now, and I jumped right into it.
Sure. Can you tell us a little bit more about the original script and how it differed from what Society ended up being?
Well, I would say the main difference was it didn't have the fantastic element. The original script was sort of the Society members were using the kids sort of for a blood cult. It was more of a kind of, I don't know, just they killed them. And I'm a horror fan, and I also am like a surrealist kind of fan. I like weird stuff. And so like Zap Comics or something like that. And so I thought, I'm not going to make a movie that people just like, killing. It just seemed really, it didn't seem good enough. It seems, if I'm getting one movie, I'm not going to do that. And so I tried to think, at that time, that was like after Nightmare on Elm Street. And Nightmare on Elm Street was, and The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. So all these rubber effects in Hollywood, all this foam latex and methacellulose, and there was this whole movement of special makeup effects, and everybody was trying to outdo each other. Rick Baker and all these people were. Everybody was Howling, American Werewolf, and then especially Nightmare on Elm Street, where it got surreal. Because if you'll remember the original, when I forget, somebody picks up the phone and a tongue comes out, and you go, wow, that's what I want to do. So that kind of made me, I was trying to think, and at that time there was a lot of movies, certainly the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, every succeeding one, I think by the time we did Society there might have been 3 of them by then. And some of them, I think the third Nightmare on Elm Street it's sort of like it had like about 4 different effects companies, and everybody got their scene. And you sort of went to see it to see what they'd come up with, And I remember Screaming Mad, it's before I met George, but he had Roach Motel one. You check in, you don't check out. And he worked with, I think, Steve Johnson on that. And those were, so that was sort of something that was happening, this idea of rubber effects. And I thought, what effect would I like to see in a movie? We have this, I like the whole concept of the script. I love that sort of weird paranoia of it. And I thought, well, what would I like to see? And then I thought, well, I'd like to see Flash melding into Flash. I haven't seen that. And so then, from there, we started developing that idea. And by that time, then I met Screaming Mad George, And he was proposed, the meeting was proposed by the financiers who were Japanese, and Screaming Mad George is Japanese. His actual name is Joji Tani. And but he's like this, he's considers himself a surrealist artist. I've always been a fan of expressionism and surrealism. So when I met him, we went to his house and we watched Andalusian Dog, and we got out all the surrealist stuff, and already started picking images to use for the movie. And generally the way I tend to work on movies is to start with some inspiration, not necessarily mine, it can be someone else's. And then if I like it, then I try to back engineer it to give it some logic.
So where did the butthead image come?
Well, you know, it just came from a line of dialogue.
Awesome.
You know, back then people used to call each other butthead. I don't think they do it anymore. They did. And so the guy called his dad a butthead. And so one time when we were coming up with stuff to do, we said, well, he should be a butthead. It's similar to, you know, on Reanimator, when the head giving head, it was kind of like Dennis Bailey said, a visual pun. You know? And so you kind of go, yeah, we'll just do that. And with society, you know, you can do whatever you wanted. You know, so whatever came to mind, and it, you know, ultimately a lot of it doesn't make sense, but you know, sometimes it ends up making sense. You know, if you just go there. You know?
So what was your kind of gateway into loving horror so much? And was there anything from that movie that kind of transferred over into your work later on?
You mean society?
To like anything that you
Oh,
work
well,
on.
I would say, I think everybody who makes movies, and probably everything else, it always comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think most people who are horror fans, when they're past the age of like 15 or 20, generally the ones I've known have had some youthful experience with the horror movie that kind of infected them. And it's not, and then they, you know, people my age that like horror, you can believe that they were like 5 years old and saw something they shouldn't. It's kind of like a drug, you know, it makes you sick at first, and then you're chasing the dragon. After a while, it doesn't work anymore. You keep wanting it. You keep going to the movies and hoping to get that feeling again, you know. So for me, the first one was A Creature with the Atom Brain, and I was probably about 5 years old, and that made me sick.
The movie's terrifying.
The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad was very disturbing, you know. Psycho, you know, I saw that when it first came out. I was about 12 years old. That was tough. So there was a lot of stuff like that. But within society, I actually have tried to chase down where things come from. So I know, for example, when the kid is in the closet, when she finds her earring at the beginning, I know that's from the Spiral Staircase. I saw it, you know. I didn't know it when I did it, but since then I looked, I said, well, that was where that came from. That movie, I watched that movie a lot of times. I think that the melding of flesh came from Dr. X, which is a 1933 movie with Fay Ray. Not a very good movie, but it had this one color sequence where Dr. X makes the synthetic flesh, and there was something really disturbing about that transformation stuff. And I was always a big fan of anything that was transformation, you know, like in the Wolfman, the stop motion, you know, or, you know, up in the Howling, you know, when they did replacement mechanical makeup stuff. You know, anything that was where something transforms into something else is always sort of provided me with a kind of thrill. So I think that's where that came from, you know. But and in some ways, I think that the whole idea of the orgiastic ending, I think I saw Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments at too early an age. And when Moses came down with those tablets and everybody was like orgiastic, I think that really affected me. You know, there was that sex and there was, you know, and I think that, you know, with horror, for me it's always sex and death, you know. And if it doesn't have a transgressive element, I'm disappointed.
So we have some time for questions from the audience. Does anyone ask anything?
In the back.
I see one hand back there.
I just wanted to ask about the mom in the movie, the mom.
You have to pick the part that just doesn't make sense.
Is she like in the cult at some point?
Well, she's just been shunting too much. You know? So, you know, that whole hair thing, it was tough to make that work. You know, a lot of stuff, like I said, you start using it, it's maybe in the script, and then you try to make sense out of it. The idea behind her, as I kind of came around, was that the shunt is something that the blue bloods, this other species, this other class, which developed parallel to regular punk humans, these people had been, back in caveman days, they'd been infected by some parasite that had no sort of form of its own, and it gave them the power to dominate others, and in every part of the world. And they, of course, all intermarried as they dominated others, and they created a literal blue blood, sort of a different species. And the problem was that as they developed over the millennia, you know, I don't know if you've ever, you know, know about breeding dogs. If you breed dogs, at one point you have to bring in a mutt, you have to bring in a mongrel, because they'll end up with, like a German Shepherd will end up with hip dysplasia. You need to, that's why we have a taboo against incest and, you know, not doing a first cousin, because the gene pool is too small and you'll end up with kind of weak characteristics, and we see that in the royal aristocratic families throughout the history of the West. They end up with idiots and weirdos. And so with dogs, what you do is you bring in a mongrel and you invigorate the breed. So the way I saw the shunt was that this society class, they have to bring in the mongrel. So Bill's a mongrel. He's Bill the bastard. He's a nobody. He's nothing. But they got to bring him in so that they don't end up being all a bunch of idiots. They got to keep it going. And so that's the whole point of the movie. But if you shunt too much, you'll end up like Mrs. Garland. That's why Judge Carter says, "Man, I'm getting too old for this." You know, it's a lot of fun. It's a great thrill, but, you know, be careful. You know, you can't. So I think that's, and it's not about just having money. You know, that's not it at all. You've got to be born into society. It takes many generations to do that. The people who really have power, you don't know who they are. And they don't put their names out in the newspaper, and they're not celebrities. It's, you know. So the idea that someone just has a lot of money and they're in society, that's not it. It's not about money, it's about being in society.
Any other questions?
You mentioned before the movie that it was very popular, it didn't get a lot of popularity in North America. It was really popular in Japan and England. And those are two cultures that have really strong aristocracy. Do you think that the movie people respond to the movie there because of the way the movie recognizes that kind of separate
I do. I think it's that, and also, you know, it's the first time I directed. There's a lot of clunky stuff in there. There's a lot of bad acting and stuff. I didn't know what I was. I never had any training to be a director or producer or anything. So you learn on the job. A lot of movies that I've done work better overseas because maybe in this country people might see how goofy it is. You know, it's just like us. We watch a Japanese horror movie and you see something, I'll watch something and I'll tell my friend, that's stupid, why would you do that? You go, oh, that's the Japanese culture. That's how they do it over there. And you don't know it isn't, it's actually stupid. And I think a lot of stuff maybe works from low-budget American movies, Western movies, the same way. And also, when a lot of these movies, when they go to another country, they get dubbed. And they get dubbed by super good actors. So when you have a bad actor here, well, you guys can watch it and go, oh, God. But over there, now they've got one of their great actors doing it, and it seems like a real movie. That's one part. The other side of it is what you said, and I think in UK it really did work. I didn't know it back then, there was no internet. So when people told me that, I was skeptical because I was so disappointed. Even my friends kind of treated me like I had cancer when they watched it. You know, it was like, you know, and it's so disappointing. You know? And the reviews were just scathing, you know. And I think that Variety said it was rough trade gay porno or something. Why are they being so mean? Why are people offended? I thought it was fun, you know. But in the UK, they really liked it. And then, like Sight and Sound magazine, like had me write an article for it. I don't know if you know Sight and Sound. It's like, you know, it's like an art magazine. And you're kind of going, this is like, doesn't compute. And in Spain, I know it worked well, and France, Italy, and Japan. But back then, you didn't see any of this stuff. And so, but here it was, in North America, it was like nothing. And it wasn't until the 2000s that it started coming back. And part of it, I think, is that this was made at the height of the Reagan era. And I think the movies in this vein are like Heathers and The Parents. I think these kind of movies, I think, reflect the same idea, but I think people didn't buy it. And I think in UK, for example, they believed that class stuff. They really believed it, but I think in the Reagan era, people really believed that if you just work hard, you're going to succeed. You know, that there aren't any classes. So I think making fun of that idea didn't resonate so much. And for some reason now there's more, you know, I think there's another part of it is that people look back to the 80s now kind of with a sort of nostalgia, and they look at it like, you know, it's sort of reaching back, and there's like this whole idea of getting LP records and VHS tapes, and so a lot of the, you know, they like to watch the hairstyles and the clothes, you know, all the goofy stuff from the 80s. I mean, this is sort of, it's kind of like a high school comedy from the 80s, you know, with the, you know, you know, the silly girlfriend he has. I mean, come on. You don't want to go, do you? Why don't we ever get invited? I mean, that stuff I think is hilarious. It's great, but it's like very 80s. It's not today. None of those characters, I think, could resonate today. But I think now people look back and they go, oh, it's so 80s. You know, that's so much fun. And then on the other side of it, I think because movies came in, there's no more development in rubber effects. And so it sort of became, it's kind of like stop motion. There'll never be anybody as good as Ray Harryhausen. You look at the stuff he did in the 50s, it's never going to be any better than that because nobody will ever, there'll be never any market for it. There'll be never any reason for anybody to put the kind of work you have to go into that. Or Bernard Herrmann, you'll never have a composer like him again who worked for 20 years in radio doing narrative music day after day. Well, we don't have narrative music anymore. It's all sort of sound effects music, and so it's not like music works different. So when you listen to Bernard Herrmann, you kind of go, wow, that's really something. And when you, I think in society, when you watch The Shining, you know, it's not going to be too many years where it's going to be like watching the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. You're going to go, what is this? This is too weird. And nobody's ever going to do anything like it because that technique is gone. It's over. It's never going to be brought back. And so it sort of represents something probably that's not going to ever have any competition.
I think we have time for one more question.
Do you ever think you'd want to do a sequel now? That's how you've ever
I'm always working on it. Yeah, I want to do a sequel where a girl finds out how this takes place in the sort of the clubs on Hollywood Boulevard. You know, where you have the VIP room and the VVIP room, the after party and the upstairs and the after. Everything keeps you out. And she wants to be a part of the cool crowd, and of course, when she finally finds out the horror of it, she decides that she still wants to be. You know, the difference today is Billy would want to be a part of it. You know, today people are willing to sell their soul to be a part of it, and I think in this movie they wouldn't. They'd be shocked. It'd be terrible.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. This was amazing.
Thanks a lot.